And now on Rough Diamond Radio, we have part 6 of Hengist's Inheritance.
Chapter 28. Hengist hung on to the cross harness for dear life, as the coach driver made valiant but ineffectual attempts at pulling the horses back. The bier then clipped a stone curb, bucking it up onto two wheels for a few yards, before it crashed back down to continue its way unabated. It was this maneuver that brought the coach driver's attempts at stopping the horse's flight to an end, as it sent him flying like a large disheveled crow, crashing through the stained glass window of the station's chapel. As the carriage careered out of the station, Hengist scrambled at the leather straps and buckles that made up the horse team's tack, as he tried to get enough purchase to pull himself up and away from the cobblestones, passing at a frightening speed inches below him. With a monumental effort, he threw a leg up and over one of the carriage's shafts, and taking hold with both hands on the top edge of one of the harnesses, pulled himself up and onto the back of one of the horses, who manically continued on their way, one trying to get away from the fire in his rectum, the other one for simple enjoyment. He hadn't had so much fun since he peed on the stable lad. Enjoyment wasn't the emotion Hengist was experiencing. Sphincter-twisting panic described it better. It soon dawned on Hengist that to continue sitting there grasping the horse's mane while said horse tried to break the land speed record was likely to end badly. As it was, his bollocks already felt like they were being used as a high-speed Newton's cradle. So Hengist took hold of his panic and started to make his terrified way off the horse, shuffling backwards up the shafts towards the driver's bench and the reins. The trees, road and shrubbery hurtled past as Hengist lunged onto the bench. The horses then decided, on the spur of the moment, to take a left turn off the paved road to avoid a gleaming Rolls-Royce. The horses considered this maneuver wise, the funeral bier and Hengist thought different. First thing to happen was one of the carriage's wheels hit the curb and parted company with its axle. The axle, which now devoid of its support and employment, crashed to the ground and promptly buried itself 6 inches into the soft earth. This in turn caused the bier to spin violently sideways. Sir Stephen Morris, whom had up until then traveled unconcerned in the back of the bier, decided to leave his current mode of transportation. It couldn't be called a conscious decision, with him being dead. But a stubborn man in life, it would take more than being deceased to stop Sir Stephen Morris QC leaving if he wanted to do so. His coffin smashed through the side glass of the carriage. It continued to skid along the road, showering sparks behind it for a good 20 yards. It eventually came to rest, half on the road and half in a ditch. Hengist also parted ways with the carriage. As with Sir Stephen Morris QC, Hengist's departure could in no way be considered a conscious decision. He flew off the driver's plank into the air, traveling, seemingly for an age, until gravity took over and pulled him back to earth with a crunching thump. He came to rest flat on his back, his eyes shut, head swimming and wondering if he was dead. He then became aware of the smell of cigar smoke. Forcing his eyes to open, he managed to focus them enough to see 2 blurry faces staring down at him. As blackness closed in on him again, he heard one of the faces say, "Bloody hell, it's him. The Grump fellow." "What the hell do you mean it's him?" Plumley said, looking down at the unconscious figure at his feet. "It's him, that bloody Grump fellow," Shelby stammered. "You mean he's the one who the letter was addressed to?" Yes. But what's he doing here?" "The same as us, I'd say at a guess, stupid." "Yes, I guess you're right," considered Shelby. "But all this," Shelby gestured towards the coffin in the ditch, and the now stationary bier with its 2 blowing horses, that had come to a stop 20 yards away up the side track. Plumley shrugged his shoulders. "I'll be buggered if I know, Shelby, old fruit, but best we get the hell out of here before he comes round, I think," he said. Shelby looked surprised. Shouldn't we do something though? He could be hurt. Plumley looked again at the prone Hengist. I should imagine he is no doubt somewhat battered and bruised, but that is no concern of mine, old boy. I'm off, he said, quickly returning to pick up the scattered coins. Shelby followed, not yet convinced. But Ronald? I mean, what if? As Plumley knelt and started to retrieve the treasure, he interrupted Shelby's reservations. Also, may I point out, Shelby, old man, that being present when he comes round will assuredly require an explanation of how you came to be here. Not to mention giving him these back. Plumley held out the gold coins that glittered in his palm. Shelby said nothing, but dropped to his knees and started collecting up the coins. What's that? He spluttered. Both men froze and listened. In the distance, the sound of an animated crowd could be heard approaching. Sounds like someone has come looking for a missing coffin. Time to make ourselves scarce, I think, old boy, Plumley said. Frantically picking up any remaining coins he could see, Plumley then got to his feet, and was off to the rolls as quick as his legs would carry him. Don't forget the spare wheel, Shelby, and hurry, man, for Pete's sake, he shouted over his shoulder. Shelby needed no encouragement. He thrust the coins he had collected into his pocket, grabbed the spare wheel, and followed Plumley as quick as he could. As he got to the car, Plumley fired up the engine and shouted out of the window. Hurry, man. Shelby thrust the spare wheel into the car's boot, slammed it shut, and threw himself headfirst into the back seat as Plumley sped off. Chapter 29. The darkness slowly receded for Hengist, only to be replaced by a blinding light and a cacophony of sound that made him wince. He's coming round, a voice crashed through the fog of his mind. Hengist? Hengist, my sweet, are you okay? Please say you're okay, said another panicked voice. Hengist slowly opened his eyes, and two blurry figures before him slowly focused into the Reverend Twist and Harriet. Praise the Lord, said the Reverend Twist, clasping his hands together. He's coming round. Hengist, darling, are you okay? Harriet asked in a concerned tone. I think so, Petal, Hengist shakily replied. Oh, darling, thank God, said Harriet, grasping Hengist's hand with relief. Indeed, young lady, thanks be to God, added the Reverend Twist. Hengist's foggy mind started to clear, and he tried to raise himself up. Easy does it, young man. You've had an unfortunate experience, the Reverend said, helping Hengist up into a sitting position. Hengist considered the Reverend's description of what he'd just been through, and found it lacking. He felt the matter needed clarification. An unfortunate experience? More like a high-speed fucking nightmare. Those bastard horses were demented. Demented. But I can't say I blame them. I'd be the same if some little sawn-off shit had stuffed a mint humbug up my ass. Hengist? Language, scolded Harriet, turning to the Reverend Twist added. Sorry about that, Reverend, he must be shaken up. Shaken up. I tell you, Hengist started, but any further comment was stifled by Harriet quickly clamping her hand over his mouth. No need for apologies, Mrs. Grump, I assure you. Reverend Twist smiled beatifically and turned to Hengist. You just sit there a while, young man, and collect yourself. I'll return presently. And with another smile and a nod of the head to Harriet, went to see if he could be of help elsewhere. Harriet turned her attention back to her husband. Oh, darling, you did give me a fright. You sure you're okay? I feel like I've been run over by a sodding lorry, but yeah, I'm okay, Petal, said Hengist. Then for the first time since coming round, took in the scene around him. It was a hive of activity. Several men were struggling to retrieve the coffin out of the ditch, while another larger group manhandled the now less than spotless bier upright, as a couple of their colleagues attempted to reattach the wheel. All this witnessed by a concerned crowd. Hengist, Harriet said in a low voice. What? Hengist replied, rubbing his head. Can you see what I see? Yes, a bloody hell of a mess. No. Not this lot. What then? Hengist replied, studying the assembled crowd more intently. There. Hengist, look, Harriet frantically whispered while pointing to the green angel atop the marble plinth not 20 yards away. Aren't we looking for something like that? Hengist turned his head to look. Bloody hell. I think you're right. Get me up. Hengist struggled to get to his feet. But what about all these people? Harriet hissed in a stage whisper. They're too busy to worry what we're up to. I just want to look. Get me up. Oh hell, said Harriet as she helped Hengist up and over to the marble plinth. They both stared up at the space where the middle sconce had been. The gap stood out like a missing front tooth on a beautiful woman. Looks like we're too late, darling. Someone has beaten us to it, Harriet said. I suppose so, said Hengist, looking around. He bent down and picked up the twisted sconce. Yeah, and very recently to boot is my bet. Why do you say that, love? Look at the grass here, it's all crushed down and trampled, and this sconce thing has a load of fresh damage. Show me, Harriet asked. Hengist handed the sconce to Harriet for her inspection. I think you may be right, Sherlock, but that doesn't help us now, does it, darling? When she didn't get a reply, she looked away from the sconce to her husband. Darling, Hengist was miles away. Hengist, you okay? What's the matter, sweetheart? Hengist still didn't reply. He just gently removed Harriet's hand off his arm, stepped forward, bent down, and retrieved something from the crushed grass. Standing up straight again, he held out his hand to Harriet, and there in his palm was a glistening gold coin. Any comment on this acquirement was cut short by the return of the Reverend Twist. Ah, my young man, back on your feet again, I see. Good. Hengist thrust the coin into his pocket. Yes, thank you, Reverend, I'm feeling a lot better now, spluttered Hengist in reply. Well, the Reverend Twist continued. It appears that the interments are still to take place, so I must away to attend to my duties, but I thought I'd make sure you are recovered enough to make your way back to the station first. I'm fine, Reverend, think no more about it. Hengist took the Reverend's arm and steered him back to the road. My wife and I will rest a while and meet you back at the station for the return journey, he said as they walked. Well, if you're sure you don't require any assistance, young man. Yes, Reverend, he's fine. It would take more than a small thing like this to get the better of my Hengist, Harriet said, as she walked alongside her husband, brushing dirt and grass off him with her hand. Thank the Lord, when I think what might have happened. Think no more about it, Reverend. You have more pressing duties to perform. Very considerate of you, young man. Until we meet for the return trip then, Mrs. Grump, said Reverend Twist, touching his hat to Harriet, who smiled back. Harriet and Hengist sat at the side of the road, eagerly waiting for the coffin to be reinstalled in the now partially repaired bier, so they could continue the search for more coins. How many more do you think are there? Harriet asked. I don't know, do I? Let's have a look at the one you picked up. Not here, for God's sake, woman, someone might see. Wait until everyone's buggered off. I wonder what it's worth, darling, Harriet mused. God knows, but don't build your hopes up, Petal. We don't even know if it's real, do we? Said Hengist. It's got to be real. Why? A lot of trouble to go to for a joke, isn't it? Reasoned Harriet. Suppose so, agreed her husband. They didn't have to wait too long before the now less than pristine, wobbly-wheeled bier began to move off. Hengist eagerly watched it make its way back up the road, its two now disheveled and knackered horses leading the way. Its attendant crowd walked slowly behind. He considered the cortege. It now looked more like part of a Wild West wagon train that had just been attacked by a load of angry, pissed-off Red Indians than the dignified procession it had been at the start of its journey. Now can we go look? Harriet said. Okay, but slowly, don't rush over there. Hengist helped Harriet to her feet, and they then slowly walked over to the green angel-topped marble plinth. First they stood there turning in small circles, looking at the ground, hoping to see another coin. It was Harriet who realized that this way of looking might not be that efficient. We're doing this all wrong, darling. How do you mean? Step over here with me, Harriet said, taking a few paces away from the marble plinth and getting down on her hands and knees. Hengist knew better than to question his wife, he simply followed her lead. Now we slowly crawl up and down, making sure we don't miss anything, okay? Got it, Petal? They spent the next 10 minutes crawling back and forth across the grass that surrounded the marble plinth. At the end of this time, the tally of gold coins stood at 3. I should say that's that, Petal. Hengist got to his feet and helped his wife up. Yes, I think we got any that had been left behind, Harriet said, brushing herself down. Yeah, I wonder what they're worth, Hengist said, turning the 3 coins in the palm of his hand. Put them away, darling, we can worry about that later. Best we start walking back to the station. I don't fancy spending a night here if we miss the train back. Yeah, that wouldn't be good. Shall we? Harriet accepted her husband's proffered arm, and they started back up the road. As they walked, Hengist mulled over the recent events, then it struck him, and he quickly looked back over his shoulder. Where's the bloody car gone? What car? There was a bloody big Rolls-Royce in the road. Harriet also stopped and looked back down the empty road, then gently placed the palm of her hand on Hengist's forehead. Don't worry, my darling, you'll be right as rain when we get you home and into a warm bath. Hengist brushed her hand away. No. When I was thrown into fucking orbit by those bloody horses, it was because they swerved up the side path to avoid a damn car. Well, it wasn't there when the Reverend and I turned up, darling. Well, it was bloody there when I did. If it hadn't been, those bloody horses would be in Manchester by now. Also, I remember now. There were 2 people staring down at me before I passed out. 2 people, Harriet looked puzzled. Yes, 2 people. One of them said something. Said something, said Harriet. Yes. They said something, I'm bloody sure of it. Quiet a moment, Petal, I'm trying to think. Hengist scrunched his eyes shut as an aid to his memory. It worked, it's him that's the Grump fellow. That's what they said, I'm sure of it, it's him that's the Grump fellow. Are you sure, darling? You have had a bump on the head, you know. I'd not forgotten that fact, sweet pea, Hengist said as he gingerly touched the tender spot on his head, but that's what they said. But that means whoever it was knew you. Hengist thought this over in his mind. Yes, it does, doesn't it, then added. There's got to be more to it than that, Harriet. I don't understand. I receive a letter informing me of an inheritance hidden under a green angel only a day ago, right? Right? We arrive at said angel to find someone else had been there before us. And not just before, but minutes before. Also, this person not only knows where to look, but also knows what I look like. Yes? Yes. And this person, or should I say these persons, also felt it wise to scarper damn quick when I appeared. So urgent was their haste, they leave some of the coins behind. A sure sign they knew they were up to no good, I'd say. Okay, what does it all mean, Sherlock? I don't know, but I'm going to do my damnedest to find out, Watson. Well, let's get home first, yes, darling? As you wish, love. They then turned as one and continued their way towards the station. After a short pleasant stroll, they arrived back at the station, finding it all but deserted, save for a few railwaymen and station guards. Realizing they had a bit of a wait, they sat themselves down on one of the wooden benches lining the platform. After a while, mourners started trickling back in 2s and 3s. Then out of nowhere, a young lad appeared in front of them. Hello, Mrs. The vicar sent me to find you and give you this. The young lad offered Harriet her forgotten paint box. You, exclaimed Hengist, recognizing the lad responsible for the earlier equine suppository. The young lad stepped back and readied to make himself scarce the second his task was completed. The vicar said to return it to you, Mrs. He again offered the paint box, but this time his arms at full stretch, and keeping his distance from Hengist should he lunge for him. Hengist got to his feet, and the lad took another step backwards. But before Hengist could act, the vicar appeared. Ah, good lad, you found the lady. I knew I could rely on you, young man, the vicar said beatifically, looking down at the boy and ruffling his hair. "I don't know what I'd do without my little helper Simon here. I tell you, Mr. Grump, this one is sharp as a tack," he added. The lad took this opportunity to quickly step forward and thrust the paint box into Harriet's arms, and just as quickly retreated to the vicar's side. "Little help," Hengist didn't finish his sentence as a large hand fell on his shoulder and pushed him aside. "Am I addressing the person in charge of the rabble responsible for the travesty perpetrated here today?" said an angry bearded man to the Reverend Twist. "I am the officiating clergyman for the Bethnal Green party, if that's what you mean, young man," the Reverend Twist replied. "Then you can furnish me with the name of the person or persons responsible for today's irreverent and deplorable state of affairs," blustered the man. "I fail to see how I can help you, sir. I am simply here to discharge my duties in regards to a deceased member of my parish," answered the Reverend Twist. "Well, take note, sir. I intend to get to the bottom of this, and see the ones responsible suffer the full force of the law." "I assure you, sir," the Reverend Twist said, only to be briskly interrupted. "Save your excuses for the authorities, sir. I am not without influence in these matters." Then added to make his point. "And be in no doubt the bishop, who is a personal friend, will be informed of today's events." It crossed Reverend Twist's mind to point out to this fellow that if he was going to speak to the bishop, it would be best to do so before 10 in the morning, due to the bishop's liking for brandy on his cornflakes as well as milk. The irate man then turned and, as if seeing Hengist for the first time, continued his tirade in his direction. "You, sir, what do you know of today's assault on decency? Speak up, man. What do you know of events?" He then poked Hengist's chest with his index finger. "I will not be thwarted in this matter." Hengist looked at the place on his chest recently vacated by the bearded man's digit, then down at Simon, and then back up to the man. The bearded man continued. "Out with it, sir. I demand to know," he said, raising a hand with an extended finger to repeat the poking exercise. Hengist grabbed the man's wrist. "I can't help you," he said. Then glancing at Simon added, "We know nothing, do we, lad?" Simon shook his head and grinned. "Mind you, I think it is only fair to point out," Hengist continued. "If you insist on poking me again, it'll take a good surgeon 2 hours to get your fucking top hat back." "Sir." Harriet winced and said a silent prayer. The Reverend Twist, with a turn of speed Harriet didn't think he was capable of, stepped forward between Hengist and the irate beard. Now, gentlemen," Reverend Twist addressed the quivering beard. "I think you are unaware, sir. Mr. Grump here is the gentleman who retrieved the runaway horses." "Is that true, sir?" said the bearded man to Hengist. Hengist gave a deprecating nod and a smile, by way of a reply, and released the man's wrist. The bearded man considered the situation for a second, then grunted. "Pah," and stormed off. "What a thoroughly unpleasant fellow," said the Reverend Twist. "Yes, I'd agree with that statement, Reverend." Further discussion on the merits of the bearded man was cut short by Harriet. "Here comes the train back, I think," she said, pointing down the line towards an approaching cloud of steam and smoke that presumably hid their train. As the train slowed to a stop, the Reverend Twist said, "Well, I'd better go make sure all is orderly and ready for departure. We don't want any more unpleasantness, do we? And I do hope to have your company for the return journey." "Yes, certainly, we'll see you in a moment then, Reverend," replied Hengist. "Come, Simon, work to do." The Reverend Twist addressed the young lad, and started off down the platform to administer guidance to his flock. Young Simon looked up at Hengist. "Thanks, Mr. You is all right, you is," he said before following quickly in the wake of his mentor. Harriet, who was still seated on the bench grasping her paint box, said, "This is turning out to be one hell of a day, darling." "You can say that again, pet." "Well, let's see what the rest of the day has in store for us," said Harriet, getting up of the bench, taking her husband's arm and leading him through the crowd to their coach. Chapter 30. The Rolls-Royce rocketed through the cemetery, a whirlwind of gravel and leaves in its wake. Turning onto the main road, its tires squealed in the search of grip on the tarmac surface, and suspension groaned to keep the vehicle on an even keel. The car fish-tailed out of the turn before righting itself and hurtling off down the road. Ronald Plumlee, wide-eyed, shouted over the engine noise, "Anything after us?" "No, nothing that I can see," came the shouted reply. They continued on at a breakneck speed. Only when he was sure nobody was chasing them did Ronald Plumlee relax his grip on the wheel, changed gear, and slow to a more reasonable pace. "Jesus, that was a close call, old man, I must say. But I think we got away with it," he said. Yes, I think so. But what the hell happened back there, Ronald? Where did those bloody horses come from? And did you see that coffin flying through the air?" "Yes, old boy, bizarre isn't the word for it. But who cares, we got away with it." "How many coins did you get?" "I don't know." "Well, bloody count them, Shelby." "Count them? What, here?" "No, on the bloody roof. Of course here, man." Plumlee thrust his hand into his jacket pocket. "Here's what I picked up," he said, handing a handful of coins over his shoulder to Shelby on the back seat. Shelby took his handkerchief out of his pocket, spread it out on his lap. He put his hand in his pocket, took out several gold coins, and put them with the ones Plumlee had handed him. Then he started to count them. After a while, he leaned forward over Plumlee's shoulder. 22. "How many is that in total, old boy?" "Sorry, I don't understand. There are 22 coins." "Yes. Plus, how many are you hiding in your pocket?" Shelby snorted in disgust, but retrieved a couple more coins from his pocket, adding them to the pile in front of him. Then, in a rare show of forcefulness, put his hand between the front seats, clicked his fingers, and held his palm out. Its meaning was obvious. Ronald Plumlee gritted his teeth with annoyance, but he too went to his pocket and then dropped 2 coins into the open palm. But the palm just clicked its fingers again and remained where it was. Plumlee turned puce with rage, but dropped a last coin into the outstretched hand, which then swiftly disappeared into the back. Shelby again appeared over Plumlee's shoulder. 27, Shelby said. Not bad at all. What do you think they're worth then, old boy?" Shelby jiggled a coin in his hand. "Well, they're not sovereigns. I don't know what they are, but each coin must weigh half an ounce at least, I'd say." "What is the price of gold today, if they are indeed gold?" "I don't know." "Do you?" Ronald Plumlee thought for a moment. "No bloody idea, old boy, but I know how we can find out." As they passed through the next village, he slowed and pulled over outside the village shop. "Stay here, old boy, I'll only be a moment," said Plumlee, exiting the car and entering the shop. A minute later, he returned holding a copy of the Financial Times, which he tossed to Shelby. "Take a look in there, old man," Plumlee said, starting the engine and driving off. They continued on their way in silence. Plumlee busied himself with lighting up a cigar. Shelby scribbled away in a small pocketbook. He was soon finished. He put the pocketbook away, tied the coins up in the handkerchief, and tucked it in the inside pocket of his jacket. He then scrambled over into the front passenger seat. Pringle looked at him. "Well, what's answer?" "The price of gold at the moment is £35 an ounce, and there are 27 coins. If they are half an ounce each, collectively they weigh 13.5 ounces. Which means the coins are worth?" Shelby paused for effect and said, £472. "Jesus Christ, Shelby. That's a very profitable morning's work, I'd say," said Plumlee, grinning from ear to ear. "Yes, I agree, Ronald, very profitable indeed." Shelby replied, a similar grin on his face. The Rolls continued on its way back to Plumlee Hall, with 2 very smug occupants. Chapter 31. Plumlee drove down the road. The Rolls-Royce engine purred away as it ate the miles back to the hall. As they approached the outskirts of Eastbourne, Plumlee turned to his passenger. "Shelby, what time is it, old man?" 3 o'clock. "Why?" "Change of plans, old boy. We should have time if we rush," Plumlee said, and increased their speed. "Time for what?" "To get these coins properly valued, old boy, that's what." There's a dealer in Eastbourne I've used before. What do you mean? We can't just walk into a shop with a fist full of gold coins. Questions will be asked, Shelby said, concern in his voice. What do you take me for? We'll only take one coin in. If asked, I'll say we need it valued as someone has offered it up to pay a gambling debt or something like that. I'm not sure we should. I think we should wait. Those coins could be on a police list or something, Shelby pleaded. Rubbish, man. Plumlee took the side road to Eastbourne. 15 minutes later, they pulled up outside a select-looking antique shop. Give me one of those coins, old man, if you please. Shelby reluctantly did as requested. He had one more attempt to curb his friend's rash behavior. Are you really sure about this, Ronald? Plumlee ignored Shelby's question and took the proffered coin. Are you coming in, Shelby, or are you going to wait outside, old chap? I'm coming in, he said. Don't you trust me, old man? No, not at all, came the reply. Plumlee laughed, exited the car, and entered the shop. Shelby sulkily followed. As the door closed behind them, a brass bell jangled. The shop interior smelt of beeswax and sandalwood. The door behind the polished mahogany counter opened, and an immaculately dressed and coiffured man entered. His general appearance was that of an 18th-century romantic poet. Welcome, gentlemen. How can I help you? He said. We'd like this valued if you would be so kind, said Plumlee, placing the gold coin on the counter. The man behind the counter stiffened, his purple cravat quivered. He ignored the coin on the counter. I'm afraid we have a 3-shilling charge for valuation, sir, he said. Of course you do, old man, not a problem. Plumlee turned to Shelby. Pay the man, he ordered. Shelby opened his wallet and handed over a 5-shilling note. Placing the 5-shilling note in a shiny brass cash register, the proprietor wrote out a receipt, which he handed to Shelby along with his change. Transaction completed, he opened a drawer, retrieved a white pair of cotton gloves, putting them on with as much theater as he could muster. Finally, he turned his attention to the coin, which he picked it up as if it was a delicate glass figurine. He studied both sides intently, followed by the edge. Next, he took a jeweler's eyeglass from his pocket, screwed it into his eye socket, and repeated the process. Then replaced the coin on the table. If you would excuse me, gentlemen, he said, and walked out of the room. He returned a minute later with a small set of scales, and proceeded to weigh the coin. With this done, he made some calculations in a small notebook, and finally turned back to Plumlee. It appears, gentlemen, what we have here is a fine gold Roman aureus. I don't recognize the emperor, there was so many of them. Weighing 0.33 ounce at today's gold price makes it worth £10 10 shillings. In regards to its weight. But I must inform you, gentlemen, such coins as these are often very sought after by many a collector. It may well be worth double the value of the gold alone. If you gentlemen could leave it with me, I'll consult a numismatic expert tomorrow. Then I'll be able to furnish you with a more precise idea of its worth. Were you gentlemen looking to sell the item, or simply required a valuation? He inquired. Sell, Plumlee said a bit too eagerly, then added, if the price is right, of course. Of course, gentlemen, leave it with me. Should you call back tomorrow, say about noon, I'll have more information for you. My card, sir? A card appeared from a waistcoat pocket, as a magician would a rabbit out of a hat. You'll give us a receipt for the coin, I take it? Shelby said, all too aware that there were lots of smartly dressed crooks out there. He was one of them, after all. Of course. Sir. The cravat said, and picked up his pen. 2 minutes later, they were back on the road. £10 each, and possibly double that. That's a grand total of something like £550, Shelby squealed. That's bloody 2 years' wages. Not too shabby a day, I'd say, Shelby, old man, not too shabby at all. The rest of the journey passed in a mood of self-congratulatory furore. The Rolls-Royce turned through the entrance to the hall. only to find its path blocked at the gatehouse by a black and red painted pole with some kind of lever and weight at one end. To one side of the barrier, a bored soldier stood in a small wooden structure that was attempting to be a sentry box. It failed. It looked like an old shed that hadn't been very well. Ronald Plumley wound down the window and hollered, "What's the meaning of this? Remove that thing immediately, you fool." "Corporal," called the bored soldier to a large bush nearby. "Are you deaf, man?" "I said shift that damn thing," Ronald Plumley shouted. "Corporal," the soldier repeated. "I'm bloody coming, for fuck's sake. Can't even take a crap in peace around here," a large soldier answered as he pushed his way out of the bushes, pulling up his trousers as he went. Seeing the stationary car, he tightened his belt. Picked up his rifle that had been leaning against the sentry box, he walked around to the driver's side window. "Now what's your business here then, sir?" "My business? I live here, you imbecile. Move your thing before I—" His diatribe was cut short by having a rifle barrel thrust up his nose, making him look like a startled piglet. "I'll ask again, sir. What is your business here?" Ronald Plumley swallowed hard. I live here, Corporal. My name is Ronald Plumley. I'm Sir Tarquin's brother. For God's sake, don't shoot." The gun barrel was removed, leaving a red ring on the end of Plumley's nose. "Why didn't you say so, sir? And your friend?" "He's my solicitor. He's staying with me this evening." "I see, sir. If you would kindly wait here a minute," the corporal said. Walking back to the wooden sentry box, he picked up a telephone handset, turned a wooden handle on the side of another box. It made a whining noise, followed by a ringing tone. He spoke into the handset. "Hi, it's Corporal Dawson at the main gate. We have a Ronald Plumley and his solicitor here. He says he lives here." He listened to the reply and said, "Okay, thanks." Dawson hung up and walked back to the car. "Sorry to detain you, sir. You may proceed." He nodded to the other soldier who pushed down on the weighted end of the pole, which rose up to allow the car to pass. Plumley grunted an acknowledgement and passed under the barrier and headed towards the west wing of the hall. Plumley was surprised at the progress the army had made since he'd left that morning. There were trucks covered with camouflage nets under the trees. Boxes of ammunition in neat piles against the sandbags surrounded the anti-aircraft guns. Men could be seen on top of the tower, and around the old stable block was a hive of activity. Ronald Plumley had regained his composure by the time they entered his plush sitting room. "Best we put those coins safe, old boy," Plumley said, holding out his hand. Reluctantly, Shelby handed them over. Plumley placed the coins into a small red leather-covered box. "Where are you going to put them, Ronald?" "In my safe, of course, old man. That is until we work out the best way of selling them, don't you know," smirked Plumley. He crossed the room to a heavy oak sideboard. On opening its doors, a dark green solid steel safe was revealed. Plumley turned the dial on the front back and forth a few times, then pulled on a brass handle. The safe made a heavy clunk, and the door swung open. Plumley placed the coins inside, shut the door, reset the safe, and stood up. "I think, old man, today events require a celebration. Why don't you nip to the wine cellar and fetch us a few bottles of bubbly, and I'll arrange some company." "You mean? Can you think of a better way to celebrate, old boy?" Shelby shivered with anticipation and hurried off to get the champagne. Waiting until Shelby's footsteps disappeared down the hall, Plumley quickly rushed back to the safe, opened it, removed the coins, and again relocked the safe. He then walked to the ornate fire surround, where he turned the wooden carved acorn adorning the left-hand side of the mantelpiece through 90 degrees. Then he repeated this on the right-hand side. There was an audible click. Plumley then pushed the center carved wooden rosette. This caused the draw that had been hidden behind the rosette to pop out. Sliding the draw forward, he placed the red box inside and pushed the draw back in. There was another click. He then turned both wooden acorns back to their original positions. Smiling to himself, he picked up the telephone. There followed a few clicks and a voice said, "What number do you require?" "Operator, get me Eastbourne 347, if you would be so kind." There followed a few more clicks, then a ringing tone. After a moment, a female voice answered. "Hello. Evening, old girl. Is that you, Ronald?" "It certainly is, my sweet." "Oh God, it's not Wednesday already, is it?" "No, old girl. I was just wondering if you're free this evening?" "Twice in 1 week, Ronald, what next?" "The thing is, old girl, I have company this evening, so do you have a friend who could accompany you, so to speak?" "Ronald dear, you are splashing out, aren't you?" adding, "I'm sure I can arrange company for your friend." "Does he have any preferences?" "If it's female and has a pulse, it will do for him." "And you, Ronald, what is your preference tonight?" "Well, dear lady, I was thinking I'd like the nun's habit and black stockings tonight, old girl." "Certainly, Ronald, I can do that for you. What would you like me to wear?" "Well, old fruit, as you're doubling up, maybe you both could join me as the Mother Superior and the Abbess?" "Ronald, you're incorrigible. You're developing a nasty habit with this nun thing, you know." "I know, old girl, I know," both of them laughed at the pun. "Mind you, this evening will cost you 15 shillings. Very reasonable, dear lady, I must say." "That's each, Ronald." "Each? Now behave yourself, or I will have the nasty Mother Superior pull down the naughty novice's knickers, so the abbess can punish their bare bottom. Can you imagine that?" "Jesus," Plumley groaned. "You certainly know which buttons to press, I'll say that for you, Margaret. That's why you keep coming back for more lovey. Oh, and this time try and contain yourself a bit better. I still can't get the stains off my wimple." She laughed. "Do we agree on 15 shillings each then?" Yes, agreed, 15 shillings each." "What time would you like us to arrive, Ronald?" "As soon as you're ready, old girl." "As soon as that? My, you are eager. Shall we say in about an hour?" "Splendid. I'll put the bubbly on ice. See you then, you old reprobate." The phone line clicked. Just as Shelby re-entered the room, 4 bottles and an ice bucket cradled in his arm. Plumley hung up his handset. In the post office telephone exchange, Dorcas Fake pulled out the connecting wire and muttered, "The dirty bastard." Chapter 32. Hengist and Harriet left the railway station, detouring from the direct route home. To enable them to pick up the dog as arranged, Alf opened the door after the first knock. Come in, don't dawdle on the doorstep," he said in a cheerful voice. But as he closed the door behind them, his tone changed to one of concern. "Everything all right, son? We were getting worried. How did you get on?" "I'm not too sure how we got on, if I'm honest," Hengist said as he made his way to the kitchen. He met his mother frantically, coming the other way. "I was so worried, I shouldn't have let you go. You are okay, aren't you? Nothing bad happened, did it? Harriet, you okay?" she said while pulling Hengist about as if to check there were no bits missing. "What do you mean you're not sure? You didn't get caught, did you?" Alf asked. "You're filthy," Mavis exclaimed and started to brush her son down. "My God, your face. It's all scratched." Hengist fought off his mother's attentions. "Stop fussing, Mum, I'm fine, and no, we didn't get caught." "Did you get anything?" "Yes, we did." "Mum, stop it, I'm fine." Mavis took no notice and continued brushing and pulling her son about. What did you get?" Alf persevered. Hengist's patience snapped. "Enough already," he grasped his mother's wrists. Then in a more conciliatory tone, "Mum, we're fine. Go get us a cuppa, please," then turned to Alf. "I'll tell you in a minute, just let us get in and sit down. For God's sake." They were soon sitting around the kitchen table, steaming cups of tea in hand. Hengist started to relate the day's events. On recounting his breakneck horse ride through the cemetery, Mavis jumped to her feet screeching, "Oh my good God! You could have been killed." Alf rolled his eyes and testily said, "For Pete's sake, woman, they're fine, you can see that. Now for the love of Ada, sit down, shut up and let the boy finish." Mavis did as she was told, but with a look on her face that said, "Oh boy, are you going to get it later, Sunbeam." Hengist continued his narrative. He told them it all. The Rolls-Royce in the road, finding the angel, the recently broken sconce, and the search for any coins left behind. At which point he placed the 3 coins they had collected on the table. "And you have no idea who the other people were?" Alf asked. "No idea, but I guess they drive a Rolls-Royce and smoke cigars." "How do you mean?" "Well, when I came round, both them and the roller had gone. Also, I could smell cigar smoke, and something else now I come to think about it, a sickly sweet kind of smell." "And you're sure you didn't recognize them, because if you heard right, they knew you?" "Yes, I realize that. Another thing. It's one hell of a coincidence those coins have been hidden presumably for years. And we all turn up at the same time to retrieve them, don't you think? Also, these 3 coins are what they left behind, so God knows how many were there to start with." Harriet picked up one of the coins. "Well, they look like gold and they feel like gold, but how can we tell if there really are gold?" Harriet asked. "I've no idea, sweetheart," Hengist replied. Alf looked around at the other 3 at the table. "That's easy, ain't it? We do the vinegar test." "The what?" "The vinegar test." 3 faces looked at him blankly. "I'll show you," Alf said, getting up from the table. "Mav, we got some white vinegar?" "Under the sink. I use it to clean the windows." Alf found the vinegar and returned to his seat. Opened the bottle and placed a drop of the clear liquid on each of the coins. "Okay, we wait a minute, and if the vinegar stays clear, it's gold, and if it gets discolored, it's not." The 4 of them leaned over the coins. After 2 minutes, Alf picked each coin up one at a time, dripped the vinegar onto the back of his hand. "Well, they're gold all right," he said. Hengist smiled. "How much are they worth, do you think, then?" Alf considered a while, then answered. "Gold coins are funny, they're worth literally their weight in gold, but some coins are worth a fortune. I know what a sovereign looks like, but these," he picked one of the coins up. "These are strange. There's a head of a fat bald man on one side, and a weird figure on the other. And it seems the bloke who made it was pissed. The head is not in the center, it's off to one side. They look old, though. Maybe they're Roman or Greek," Mavis suggested. "Could be, Mum," agreed Hengist. "But how do we find out?" Alf had the answer. "We need Solly O'Hare." "Yes. Solly O'Hare, he'd know." "Who the hell is Solly O'Hare when he's at home?" "Your dad used to use him for all things like this. Mind you, he could be dead. I've not heard or seen him for 15-odd years." "How do we find him?" "He had a shop in Whitechapel, if it's still there." "Fancy a trip to London tomorrow, Alf?" Hengist asked. "Why not, son? That okay with you, Mav?" Mavis looked coolly at her husband and said, "Of course, darling. That is, if you can still walk after I've finished with you for telling me to shut up." Hengist, realizing Alf was in for a tricky hour or 2. "Best we get home, darling," he said to Harriet. He swiftly picked up the coins off the table, put a lead on the reluctant Nobby, who had spent the whole time asleep next to the cooking range. Then with a good night, Mum, to his mother, and a see you at the station for 7, then, to Alf. He made a quick exit, with Harriet trailed behind. Chapter 3. Alf arrived at the train station with 3 minutes to spare. Hengist let out a sigh of relief on seeing him walking along the platform. "Glad you could make it, mate," he said. Alf grunted in reply. "Mum didn't give you too much grief, did she? She did sound miffed when I left last night." "Yeah, well, let's say I've had better evenings," Alf said. "Yeah, she has got a bit of a temper on her. I'll tell you what she hasn't got. A matching pair of China fire dogs. She's only got one now. The other one is a fucking jigsaw. It would be in orbit now if it hadn't hit the bloody back wall first. Yes. As I said, a bit of a temper. Understatement of the year, I'd say. Get her in a bad mood, have her parachuted behind enemy lines, and the war will be over by Wednesday. Alf's tone brightened as the 7.06 to Waterloo appeared down the track. But she made me breakfast and gave me a kiss goodbye on the doorstep, so I guess it's all okay now. The train came to a halt. Let's get today done, shall we? Hengist said and opened a carriage door. Soon they were seated, and the train pulled away. Alf, what can you tell me about my father? Not a lot, really. He was a very private man. I don't think anybody knew him that well. I only used to see him when there was work going on. I'd not hear hide nor hair from him for weeks sometimes. But he was always up for a joke, well respected and liked, never short of female company, and a great dancer by all accounts. The journey into Waterloo was completed in relative silence. It being impossible to have a confidential conversation with other passengers in their carriage. Reaching Waterloo, the two men walked off the rail platform, studied a map of the underground system for a while, then took the Bakerloo line one stop to Charing Cross, where they changed to the District line, and after a short journey, alighted at Whitechapel. Trudging up the steps to street level, they entered a different world. While Alf paused to get his bearings, Hengist looked around. Crowds of people milled around, seemingly going nowhere. Market traders hollered at potential customers, who in turn paid little attention. Young boys ran between the stalls, raising dust and kicking any litter that was deemed a good target. It wasn't like Wallop-on-Sea, that was for sure, he considered. Wallop-on-Sea had space and greenery. This place was devoid of plant life. And the only sky to be seen was the strip directly overhead, as buildings crowded in on all sides. This way, Alf said, walking off through what was obviously a market. Passing stalls selling used clothes, colorful veg, second-hand shoes and everything in between. On one stall, a limp pig carcass was being cut up for sale. The pig, its eyes open and tongue lolling out of the side of his mouth, was totally oblivious to the process of being butchered, as what was left of its blood dripped onto the bare flagstones. As Hengist passed, the butcher, who by the quality of his work learnt his trade from Jack the Ripper, rearranged the carcass. The pig then, as if in a last-ditch attempt to draw attention to the unfairness of its situation, dribbled a thin stream of blood down Hengist's trouser leg. Jesus, Hengist said, stepping away from the stall. Alf checked his progress through the crowd, looked at Hengist's trousers and said, "Welcome to the East End." "You can keep it, mate," Hengist said while trying to shake the blood off his trouser leg. He noticed the butcher staring at him, with a look on his face that said, "What did you expect, you fucking idiot? Don't get so close." They walked on for a minute when Alf pointed to a side street. "Up there, son," he said, turning off the main thoroughfare onto a less crowded street. 50 yards further on, Alf pointed to a shabby building with a peeling and faded facade. "There it is," he said. As they got closer, Hengist could just make out a sign above the door. S. O'Hare Pawnbrokers. "Is this it?" Hengist said incredulously. "What did you expect, Buckingham Palace?" Hengist shrugged. "Well, after you then, mate," he said. Alf pushed the door open, and they entered the shop. Hengist had never seen such a place. It was musty and dark. The bare 30-watt light that hung from the center of the ceiling seemed to make the room darker. Glass cabinets of various sizes crammed with a mixed assortment of objects lined the walls. Music instruments hung limply next to faded painting in tarnished gilt frames. The floor was bare floorboards. A path worn through years of traffic that led from the door to a grubby counter. Alf walked to the counter and pressed a brass reception bell. On hearing movement further back in the gloom, Alf called out, "Solly, is that you?" A figure stepped forward into the light, such as it was. "Alf? How are you doing, Solly?" "Alf, it is you, my God, it's been years. How are you?" Solly took Alf's hand and shook it vigorously. "I haven't seen you since, well, you know." Yeah, it's been a while. As if noticing Hengist for the first time, Solly said. And you are, young man? Sorry, Solly, this is Hengist. Davy's son, Alf said. Yes, I heard he had a child. Solly stepped in front of Hengist, retrieved a pair of gold-rimmed pince-nez from a waistcoat pocket, put them on, and gave Hengist a good look over. Satisfied, he smiled. Come into the office, we can talk there. I take this as business and not you visiting an old friend, Alf? Both, Solly, both, Alf replied. Solly locked and bolted the front door and hung a close sign in the window. He led Alf and Hengist into the office. When it came to gloom and clutter, the office made the outer room look like a novice. Piles of papers and books covered every surface. A green-shaded desk lamp illuminated a circle onto a leather-topped desk. There was one small window high up on one wall trying its best to let in some natural light. But given its size and the layer of dust and grime on it, it needn't have bothered. Solly directed Alf and Hengist to a couple of chairs at the desk, then he took his own seat. Well, Alf, what have we got today? Without a word, Hengist handed him a. Solly studied the coin under the light from the lamp. How on earth did you come by this? Is this the only one you have? We have two others, Hengist said. I take it you don't have any providence? Not the type that would help, Alf said. Solly frowned. With that, a telephone that had been invisible behind a particularly large pile of books started its shrill ringing. Solly picked up the phone while mouthing silent apologies. Solly O'Hare here, he answered. Oh, nice to hear from you again, Liam. How can I help you today? Solly listened intently to the caller on the other end of the line. He stiffened in his chair, slowly picked up the coin in front of him. He looked at Alf, then at the coin, then at Hengist and back to the coin. After a minute, Solly replaced the coin on the table. That sounds interesting, Liam. I have someone with me now and I need to check a few things, so is it okay if I call you back in 10 minutes? It is? That's great, speak to you in 10. Then he hung up the phone. What's the story, Alf? What do you mean? This. Solly tapped a finger on the coin. Alf, this is a very rare gold coin, a very rare coin indeed. If I'm right. It was minted in BC 52 in Egypt, by Octavia, Julius Caesar's stepson, who later became Emperor Augustus. Apparently, it was used to pay his army in the fight against Mark Antony and Cleopatra. Hang on. I think I remember reading something about these. He pushed over a pile of newspapers and frantically searched through them one at a time. When he realized the one in his hand wasn't what he was looking for, he discarded it by throwing it into the corner. This continued for a minute, then Solly held up a faded sheet of newspaper. Got it? He sat triumphantly back in his chair and started to read. Solly? One moment, young man, if you please, just refreshing my memory. Alf placed a hand on Hengist's shoulder. This is what Solly's good at, son. Solly read on for a while, then placed the newspaper down. Yes. I remember now. As I said. A very rare coin indeed. I've never come across one of them myself. I know of their existence for sure, but I've never seen one in the flesh before, so to speak. They are from a Roman hoard discovered in Towcester in the 1880s, and were in the collection of a Scottish laird. Then about 20 years ago, the laird put the whole lot up for auction. There were 30 coins in all, and all identical. Sotheby's valued them in the region of £350 to £500. So the 3 coins I have could be worth 40 or 50 quid, Hengist said happily. Solly looked at Alf. Are you sure this is Davy's son? Alf, not waiting for a reply, said to Hengist directly. That's £350 to £500 each. Jesus Christ. Hengist exploded. Are you telling me these coins are worth over £1,000? What I'm telling you is, that is what Sotheby's valued them at. But there was a snag. Isn't there always? Alf said. Bloody knew it, Hengist added. The snag was? On the day of the auction, the coins were found to be fakes. Very good ones, but fakes all the same. Yes, I'd call that a snag, Hengist admitted. It wasn't as simple as that. 3 different experts had inspected coins prior to the auction, and all 3 swore the coins they examined were genuine. Also, the photos taken for the auction catalog were compared to the coins in Sotheby's vault. It was then obvious that they were not the same coins, and a switch had been made. The consensus at the time was that either the Laird swapped the real ones for the fakes on the way to the auction, or someone else broke into the Laird's castle unnoticed and did a switch. Whatever had happened, no hide or hair has been seen of the real coin since. Then today, you 2 walk in with not 1 but 3 of the missing coins. At the very same time, I receive a phone call about someone wanting to sell yet another of these very rare and long missing coins. What? Alf spluttered. You know nothing of this then, Alf? Hell no. And you, Hengist, do you know about this other enquiry? No. But I do now, Hengist said. And I bet whoever they are, they drive a Rolls-Royce. Solly raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Where is this other enquiry from? Alf asked. Frambourne Smuggle Antiques. Solly paused, then asked, Alf, what's going on? And how are you and Davy involved? This has nothing to do with Alf or my father. Hengist said. It's all down to a bloke called Bill Trumpton. Ever heard of him? Solly shook his head. Nope, never. I can't say I have. How is he involved? It's complicated, Alf said, and spent the next 5 minutes explaining the situation best he could. When Alf had finished, Solly shifted in his chair. So it's a safe bet that the individuals in Frambourne somehow learnt the contents of your letter, and are the same 2 who beat you to the coins. I've been thinking, Hengist said. If these coins are so unique and so well documented, to say nothing of the fact that they legally belong to the Scottish Laird, they can't be sold or auctioned, and are therefore basically worthless. Unless you melt them down and get next to nothing for them. Alf looked at Solly, Solly looked at Alf, then they both looked at Hengist. It was Solly who spoke. Your education has been sorely neglected, young man. There are always people in life who are not particular how an item arrives in their possession, they are just happy to possess them. Be it a painting, a fine chine tea set, or a Roman coin. I remember one old lady who burnt down a family manor house just so she could get her hands old teddy bear reported to belong to Mary Queen of Scots. Solly continued. Admittedly, pricing of such items is difficult, as many things have to be taken into account. Finding the right customer is a skill in itself. It's a specialist job, but it can be done. That's all well and good, but how do we find such a person, for God's sake? I think I can lay my hands on one, Alf said. Who, where? Alf said nothing but pointed across the table at Solly. There's the best one in London. Solly waved at Hengist. Oh, I see, said Hengist, and quickly changed the subject. I wonder if the dealer in Frambourne knows anything. Solly smiled and picked up the phone. Liam, it's Solly here. I've done some research and your coin could be troublesome. Yes, they don't look good under a blue light. I can place it for you for the normal 20%, or take it off your hands direct for £75. Yes, Liam, just let me know. Oh, one more thing, Liam, you didn't get a name by any chance. Shame. What did he look like, if you don't mind me asking? There were 2 of them, were there? Solly picked up his pen and started writing on a scrap of paper. Thank you, Liam, that's very helpful. I don't suppose you noticed anything different about them, did you? Ah, a grey roller was it? Well, thank you again, and let me know if we have a deal. Bye for now. Well, it turns out there are 2 of them. One short and chubby with a pencil mustache, the other younger one was taller with thin weasel-like features. And they do indeed drive a Rolls-Royce. They are also due to return to the shop after 2 p.m. today to get the valuation. Hengist spoke. We can't get to Frambourne by 1 p.m. and if even we could, to do what? Maybe we should cash in the coins we have and be grateful? but I'd like to know who they are all the same. That your decision, of course, but may I point out to you that difficult though it is to place these coins with the correct people, I can be done. Each coin should bring you in, after my percentage of course, about £150, and we can assume the other men have the other 27 coins. That's over £4,000 they are walking away with. Alf and Hengist looked at each other. I hadn't thought of it like that, said Alf. I don't suppose it would hurt to look into it. Hengist said. If we hurry, could get to Frambourne by 1 p.m. The train home stops at Frambourne, doesn't it? It's 10:15 now, that's 2 hours 45. Solly again tapped the coin with his finger. What about this? You keep hold of it. Class it as security against expenses, and to see what buyers are out there. We'll chat in a week or so, by which time we should know more. Also keep in touch with that Liam. If they have more coins, they may well come back with more to sell. Solly nodded his agreement. He picked the coin up and stepped over to a large heavy green painted safe. He turned the combination lock back and forth a couple of times, then pushed down a brass handle. The followed a heavy clunk, and the door opened. Inside the safe, Hengist could see wads of notes, glittering silver and gold items and gem-encrusted jewelry peeked out of the gloom. Bloody hell, Solly, aren't you worried about getting banged of the head with all that stuff here? Solly smiled and said, Creeper. A huge mountain of a man stepped forward out of the shadows, not 5 feet from where Hengist sat. Jesus Christ! Shouted Hengist and shied away in panic from the monolith of a man, overturning his chair, falling to the floor in the process. Panic flooded through his body, then he heard Alf laughing. How do, Creeper? I was wondering where you were, Alf said. Fair to middling, Alf. Yourself, Creeper replied. Can't complain, you know. Hengist staggered to his feet. You nearly gave me a fucking heart attack. The other three laughed. Alf and Hengist made ready to leave. It was nice to see you, Alf, said Solly. It feels just like old times. Then he turned to Hengist. How can I get hold of you? Hengist wrote his new telephone number down for him. I'll get in touch if I find out any more, and you can always get me here on Whitechapel 3247 inches, Solly said. Best we get a move on if we're going to get to Frambourne by 1 p.m., Alf said. A final handshake, and they left the shop and hurried back to the station.